Hi, welcome to a new film recapped. Today we're watching There Will Be Blood, a 2007 drama. In the meantime, tell us your thoughts about our new intro. Enjoy. Daniel Plainview discovers silver in 1898 while exploring in New Mexico. He uses dynamite to make a larger hole because he is excited, but when he goes back in after the explosion, he trips and smashes his leg. But this doesn't stop him. He stuffs the silver inside his shirt and climbs out, dragging his injured leg. Then, in order to sell the valuables he has discovered, he drags his body through the dirt all the way to the town. He switched to the oil industry in 1902 and founded his own drilling company. One of his employees is killed in a mechanical accident while drilling in Los Angeles, leaving an orphan infant in the wake. H.W. Plainview, who Daniel chooses to raise as his own son, ends up being his false business partner. From then on, Daniel uses his son to persuade people that, in contrast to large corporations, he is a family man who works with trustworthy local workers and stays out of trouble. Daniel delivers a heartfelt speech in each town to persuade people to choose him over other large companies when it comes to leasing their land for drilling operations. He only responds, "She died in childbirth," to questions about his wife. A young man named Paul Sunday approaches Daniel one day in 1911 and says there is oil beneath his family's Little Boston, California land. Daniel tries to extract all the information from Paul, but he's a hard negotiator and ends up taking $500 in exchange for the site of his family's goat ranch, where he guarantees there will be an abundance of oil. Daniel and HW arrive there many days later, acting as though they are just going quail hunting. They are greeted by Paul's father, Abel Sunday, who extends his hospitality to them by providing some water and goat milk, which are delivered by Mary Sunday, one of the daughters. They encounter Eli Sunday, Paul's twin brother, a pastor who offers to serve them food as they are setting up camp. They looked into the area and found that Paul had been speaking the truth and that his land had oil. Daniel believes this is an excellent location for a pipeline, one that could be taken to the beach, and that could be worked out with Union Oil to eliminate the expenses associated with shipping and railroads. Daniel informs Abel that he wants to purchase his land later on after the family has eaten because he enjoys going quail hunting and his sick son needs the fresh air. Eli declines his extremely cheap offer because he knows about the oil and demands an additional $10,000 for his church. Daniel pushes Abel to accept it after changing it to $5,000 and only if business is good. The following day, Daniel phones his business partner to instruct him to bring all of his staff to the region so they can begin working, and he visits a realtor to inquire about the details of all the landowners surrounding the Sundays so he can consider purchasing them as well. When HW starts hanging out with Mary, he finds out that his father beats her up if she doesn't pray. Days go by, and the company gradually starts expanding. All of the nearby land is purchased by Daniel, with the exception of William Bandy's, who requests a face-to-face meeting. For the time being, Daniel ignores him because he believes it's all a hoax to get him to give him more money. If he believes that no one wants his place anymore, he will come to him and beg to sell. Additionally, he delivers a speech to the town explaining that oil drilling presents a chance for growth since his workers bring their families with them, which means that they will establish roads, schools, wells, and lots of agriculture, all of which create jobs. The well is prepared for use following several days of construction. Eli arrives with his church group to greet all of the workers. After that, he speaks with Daniel and asks that the well be blessed before drilling begins. Daniel agrees, but when it comes time for the opening, he never lets Eli join in and instead gives a few remarks with Mary at his side, including a brief blessing. When HW pulls the lever, the driller starts operating without any problems, and the community celebrates greatly afterwards. Daniel chats to Mary in front of Abel while he is eating, promising that her father won't abuse her anymore. Not too long afterward, one night they lose one of their employees in a well accident. After criticizing his soldiers for failing to appropriately alert one another when someone descends there, Daniel makes sure to securely store his belongings in a chest. When he visits the church the next morning to speak with Eli, he witnesses him deliver one of his theatrical sermons, which even involves the curing of an elderly woman's arthritis. After the liturgy, Daniel requests Eli to make sure his belongings reach his family and to speak a few things when they bury the employee. Eli agrees, but they continue to disagree on matters of faith. Eli believes it is risky for the men to work on an unblessed well, but Daniel won't allow his staff to take time off for church, insisting instead that they rest in order to put in 12-hour shifts. The church is also undergoing renovations since they are expanding its facilities due to Eli's growing following. A few days later, a gas leak that explodes is discovered by the workmen. When HW is present, Daniel hurries to save him before the fire breaks out, but by the time they return to the house, HW has already suffered damage and is now deaf. After the drilling tower finally collapses, the fire rages on, so the following day, dynamite is used to put it out since it pushes oxygen and burning fuel away from the fuel source. Daniel snoozes that night, holding his son close. However, as the days go by and HW doesn't get out of bed, Daniel starts trying to get him a city teacher. Eli confronts Daniel in front of his staff later and demands the money he is owed. In response, Daniel slaps him and throws him to the ground, criticizing him for not healing his son the way he treats his believers. In addition, he tells him not to even dare to ask for that money as he drags him by the hair and dumps him in an oily puddle. Eli becomes enraged with Abel later in the evening over the Sunday's meal, because he allowed Paul to tell strangers about the land and because he trusted Daniel. Eli even goes so far as to insult Abel by jumping on him and throwing him to the ground. A few days later, Daniel receives a strange man at his home who introduces himself as Henry Plainview, his half-brother from a previous marriage. Henry confirms his credibility by sending Daniel a letter from their sister informing him that their father passed away 3 months ago. At first, Daniel doesn't trust him, believing he is only coming for the money. In the past, Henry attempted drilling as well, but he never achieved the same level of accomplishment as his brother. He too had difficulties and spent some time behind bars. The siblings smoke some cigarettes after Daniel puts HW to sleep by forcing him to drink milk mixed with alcohol. Henry insists he hasn't come for the money or any favors, but rather is just looking for honest labor, and Daniel lets him stay. They spend the evening drinking and talking about their pasts. Daniel admits he is highly competitive and doesn't want anyone to succeed because he despises most people, but he keeps a lot of information to himself. HW lights a fire inside their home that same evening. HW tries to flee as Henry wakes up in time to put it out, but Daniel pursues him and apprehends him before he can get away. The next day, Daniel pretends they are going on a trip together and brings HW with him to board a train. However, as the train is about to depart, Daniel tells the child he must speak with the conductor and exits, leaving the child by himself. When HW realizes he is being sent to the city on his own, he tries to get off too, but a man pulls him back to make him stay because the train is moving and it is unsafe. Later on, Daniel and Henry meet with some Standard Oil executives who want to purchase his entire company along with the land. At first, Daniel appears to be open to listening, but he is unsure of what he would do if he lost his job. The salesmen keep bringing up the possibility of spending more time with his kid, which Daniel interprets as an insult. Daniel declines the offer and leaves feeling deeply hurt. While HW is away, Daniel makes an occasional attempt to inquire about his life. In the end, Daniel strikes an agreement with Union Oil to construct the pipeline to the desired coast. The remaining plot of land owned by William Bandy, whom he never went to speak with, is the only source of contention. When he visits him today, only his grandson is present, and he informs him that they will never permit him to drill on their land. After expressing his disinterest in drilling and promising to speak with Bandy later, Daniel heads outside with Henry to place several metal stakes in strategic locations throughout the property. Daniel is dubious of Henry's responses after he tells him some stories about their former neighborhood following an afternoon spent swimming with his brother. Daniel gives Henry some money later in the evening so he can hire a female, and when he returns, he is waiting for him with a gun. After working together for months, Henry, who acknowledges that he is a nobody, met the real Henry in the city. The real Henry wanted to see his brother, but they were poor, and he died of tuberculosis, so this other guy made up a story about himself based on what he heard from Henry in his diary. Daniel shoots him in the head despite his assurances that he doesn't mean any harm and makes a grave to conceal the body. He then sobs as he reads his brother's diary. William Bandy discovers him the next morning and is aware of what he did to the phony Henry. Daniel is forced to accept Bandy's offer of baptism if he wants to avoid losing money on his project. As Bandy declines the money Daniel makes him offer and instead says he will allow Daniel to build the pipeline across his land. Bandy leads Daniel to church, where Eli calls him forward during Mass to force him to kneel and confess that he has sinned and abandoned his child. He gives him several slaps to drive the demon out of him before formally baptizing him with holy water. Everyone in the community, including young Mary, greets him with joy and is glad to have him as one of them. Without any problems, the pipeline building starts, and Daniel forces HW to go home, telling him he loves him when he gets there and allowing HW to strike him in response. He is accompanied by a professor so that he can continue studying sign language. Daniel brings HW to lunch when they run into the Standard Oil personnel in the dining area. In an attempt to prove to them that he is a decent parent who looks out for his son and is also successful in his business dealings with Union Oil, Daniel can't resist making a scene. Eli departs from their community to work as a missionary in the meanwhile. H.W., who is now an adult, marries Mary in 1927. Mary has studied sign language in order to communicate with him. Daniel's oil pipeline business has made him wealthy, and he lives in a mansion with staff. One day, H.W. pays him a visit along with an interpreter. He tells his father that he loves him and that he and Mary are heading to Mexico to establish their own drilling company since they miss working in the fields. Despite the fact that his son insists otherwise, Daniel is not amused by this development and considers H.W. as his rival. In addition, he insists that H.W. speak in his own language, so he repeats that he is traveling to Mexico in his own voice while continuing to use insulting words to allude to his sign language. This does not, however, quiet Daniel, who now tells him he is ruining his reputation and acknowledges he is not his son but rather an orphan he picked up from a basket in the desert to seem good while pursuing business. He also calls H.W. nothing more than a bastard who lacks any of Daniel's qualities. Before departing, hurt, H.W. tells him he is relieved that there is no Daniel left in him. Daniel can't help but think back on their time together even as he continues to hurl insults at him as he walks away. Daniel, who is depressed and an alcoholic, passes out on his bowling alley. When Eli pays him a visit, a servant awakens him up and keeps reminding him that they are family-in-law while telling him about his work as a missionary and at a radio station. He also informs him that Bandy has passed away and that his grandson is now the land's owner. That grandson offers to act as a middleman if Daniel is interested in doing business with him to drill that land because he is also a member of Eli's church. Daniel says he would like to work with Eli on a commercial venture, but first he has to acknowledge that God doesn't exist and that he is a false prophet. Eli agrees to yell those things in the room, just as he forced Daniel to confess his crimes in church years ago. After he hesitates for a while and asks for $100,000. It appears that Eli truly needs to close this deal. When he's finished, Daniel admits that the area actually has no oil left because he took it when he built the pipelines and drained it through neighboring places. Eli finally admits to Daniel that he is in need of assistance because he lost money in the 1929 Wall Street crash, has strayed morally, and is going through a difficult period. He starts crying as he says this. However, Daniel mocks him, telling him that Paul is the true one who has been selected by the Lord and that he is now a prosperous man because of the company he started with the $10,000 Daniel gave him in exchange for the knowledge. Eli begs Daniel to stop calling him names and abusing him, but Daniel takes Eli and pushes him into the alley. He then throws some bowling balls at Eli and smashes Eli in the head with a bowling pin, killing him. When the door's attendant hears him calling his name from the other side, Daniel responds that he's done. Subscribe for more movies.